I'm doing great. How are you, Julia?
Excited to host you. Anis, to all of you watching, is a co-founder and CEO of Attention.com. Calm now, right?
Yeah. We're growing up.
Awesome. We have an all-star panel here. Welcome to the show, everyone.
Hi,
Anis,
everyone. Very excited to have this conversation with y'all.
cool. Take it away.
Sweet. To everyone who's listening, welcome to the this executive run table. A lot of people now are speaking about AI native growth, right? How can you grow your business without necessarily scaling your sales team? How can you have leaner teams way better at execution? And so I'm very happy here to host this conversation with an all-star team of operators. So we prepared a few questions, or a few themes around this, right? So would love to ask you all as a first question, where do you all stand with agent deployment?
Who's going first? Well, I mean, I could take that. So it really depends on the use case, right? So I think what we've seen a lot of success so far is with customer support, and we've seen a proliferation over there. We just had the CEO of HubSpot, post today morning about the success she's seen with HubSpot customer success offering. I think when it comes to SDRs, outbound, inbound, there's a lot of buzz around with 11 AI and with the other folks. But for the most part, uh, at the enterprise level, we focus more on enterprise agents like around AI account planning, revenue operations, sales assistants, et cetera, et cetera, and competing mostly with the likes of Copilot and Anna Einstein, et cetera. And we've seen as long as you can deliver value and really help the folks along the way, the AEs, then you're going to see usage. But if it's not really easy to use, as you know, most salespeople have ADD. So if it's not really easy to use and instant value, then unfortunately, it's going to be a long road, right? So that's what we're seeing. So
I can share my experience. Obviously, we eat our own dog food at SalesPeak. So what we have is, again, an AI agent that deals with all the inbound. Actually, instead of me speaking with everybody, I have an AI that can present me and speak with all my website visitors. So that's for granted. And now I'm not sure about to use the word agent, but just for example, I've orchestrated a multi-channel marketing campaign last week, just me and Claude. Literally took me 3 or 4 hours, something that 6 months ago I would need probably 3 weeks and two people on that. So some of it were agents, some of it of me corresponding with an AI. And we continuously think on how do we not hire the next person? How can we embed AI, whether that's agent, whether that's corresponding with that, to really improve all the process that we have, internal and external as well.
Yeah, so
Anyone?
from my
Go
experience,
for
I
it.
probably have more experience working with a tech startup. Like most of the company that I work with, they are already deploying not one but the multiple AI agents across coding, operation, marketing, and the sales. So for a while that I was thinking that that AI agent is really popular, but I traveled to Las Vegas for a conference last week, and I had a more exposure to more traditional industries. Then I realized that we're still crossing the chasm, that we're still the AI agent is popular among the early adopters, but if you start talking to the mass majority of the population, that we're still very early. That people know that AI agents are hot, but many enterprise leaders that they are still prudent in terms of thinking about to really rolling out the agent in a mass production capacity. So I heard that many companies they're testing. Definitely they're curious and they're testing, but at the same time they still feels careful and they still are in the phase of slowly experimentation and rolling out. But in the Bay Area for the tech startup, but that everyone's embracing the AI agents efficiency.
I'll share a pretty interesting stat along the way. So a couple weeks ago, I ran a poll amongst a pretty tech-oriented go-to-market audience. And here are the results, actually. So the question was, how are you thinking about AI agents for your go-to-market? And actually, only 5% were fully implemented and seeing great results, right? Which is really interesting. Um, Obviously, 30% were currently implementing, and then over 60% have not even started, right? A big part, almost 10% has not even thought about it yet, which is really interesting. But there's a still massive part of the market, and this was, bear in mind, within a tech-oriented audience. So imagine what's like within the rest of the world.
Well,
But
just
yeah,
to
on our
jump
end,
in here,
yeah.
I wanted to share a similar observation. So as a growth advisor, I work with a number of companies, both B2B and B2C. And I think one of the shared challenges that I see in all of this is, I think the potential is crazy, as a lot of our panelists here have expressed with use cases. But I do think the challenge for a lot of what we do in growth is real. And, one of the big challenges that I see is that a lot of the context that we have in our work is very cross-functional in nature. I think Omer was sharing how he sort of set up this Claude multifaceted marketing campaign, but there's various points in which there are agentic work, and there's also sort of more co-pilot work where he's primarily the driver here. And so one of the challenges here is that from doing growth internally in companies and helping companies with it, I actually generally see that the data is very siloed in nature. So, if you talk to anyone who's ever worked in growth or marketing, they'll probably be able to tell you a pretty good story about the 6 or 12 months it took them to create a single source of truth for even something like user acquisition data, or how it took them a really long time to even have one single dashboard that combined multiple data pipelines. And even then it was still imperfect, right? So I do think one of the challenges of having a highly functional agent for driving growth within the context of an organization is that a lot of the work that we do is relying on so many different tools and data that lives in different systems. And a lot of these systems are data walled gardens, like Meta ads, for example, sort of the basic performance marketing. And some data is easier to access, maybe website traffic data, but then there are campaigns that we host in our email marketing CRMs and Braze and otherwise. And there's not a really easy way to streamline all that context into a single place. So it's really tough for the autonomous agentic systems to make decisions on our behalf because they're not being able to access this data in real time. So I'm sure that that's a problem that can and eventually will be solved. But, because of that, as of today, I do think some of the best use cases that I'm, more excited about immediately roll out for are going to be much more verticalized, where there's this data context loop that can drive autonomous decisions by an agent. The great examples that we covered here today include things like outbound sales. Probably a great one where there's a lot of the automation, logic, co-pilot nature of work that can become automatic, and we can have clear decision making based on that data context loop. And, I think an area that's going to be tough, for example, for an agent to come in and really kind of take over would be for high performing creative work, where again, that data is based on creative performance that's usually housed in a separate data system or this kind of data walled garden, and that data context loop doesn't quite exist yet. So, that's kind of how I'm seeing some of the challenges, honest, to reflect some of the lack of adoption that we're seeing with agents, especially in the growth and marketing work that we do.
It's really fascinating, Sandy. I think that's really consistent with our findings as well. I mean, you offered some stats in these, but we're seeing that more than 2/3 of AI transformations are failing at right at near the outset. I think, Sandy, you call on a few reasons as to why that's the case. I also think there's this challenge of the market overhyping what agents are really capable of, and the cost of value and all the CIOs that I'm speaking with across the world are not seeing that would deliver anything near what the hype suggests that it can, and that agents are still really highly dependent on kind of a step-by-step instructions for how to go execute a task or perform a thing and to deliver something that's not going to be a hallucination back to you. And so I think users are both finding this stuff difficult. The agents that are easy to adopt are producing confusing results. And so when you, as an IT leader, go to deploy this to your organization, and that's the user's first experience, change transformation is always the hardest thing, regardless of whether it's AI or not. And that will be the case until the dawn of time. And when this is the first experience of the user, all the more reason you're going to make it difficult. And so, I think a lot of what we've been putting our time and attention to is, how can you, Sandy, I think in the example that you gave, give it the right context, the right instruction at the right time, and enable, users, people to be able to take advantage of that. And I think there's this really interesting diagram I could share with the audience as a follow-up to this, but about sort of like where the y-axis is reliability and consistency, and then the x-axis is generalizability and autonomy. And I think what I'm referring to is on the further down you go on the x-axis, the greater likelihood of hallucination you're going to see. The further you go up onto the y-axis, the more consistency in results. But that really does require you have a step-by-step, in our case, rule builder, where there's structure. You can point to a task or a project. You can get it pointed only to the relevant information it needs. You can give it clear instructions through the LLM that's embedded within that workflow, and you can integrate, human in the loop to execute for certain tasks, where the LLM is not capable.
I want to double down on this because it sounds like a lot of things are not working and are very difficult, and they might be. But I think there's a huge difference between just standard LLMs that could be hallucinating because they're not fine-tuning to what you're actually doing, and specific product and solution that were trained exactly to have a lot of guardrails and to minimize the number of oscillation. Now, is that going to be 100%? No, I don't think so. But is it going to be much better than human force working on this? I think it is. And again, the example I'm using, we got probably 2,000 leads in the last week, and we're not equipped to deal with those number of leads. If I did not have an AI that actually qualifies them and recommends what the team needs to do, I would lose many of them. Now, did the AI hallucinate them? Maybe. But 90% of them is actually pretty good. So I was able to make a lot of progress in a very short time because of that. It wasn't autonomous. I did not let the AI, respond instead of me and do those kinds of things. I don't think it's there yet, but it saves us so much time, and that's what I think companies should need to look at.
Mike, I just have one clarifying question. You opened by saying 2/3 of AI deployments are failing. Are those deployments of just kind of traditional AI augmentation or agentic AI offerings?
Good clarifying question. I think this is from our think tank that operates with independently of Asana, but is funded by Asana, and then in conjunction with university professors across the world, including locally here, at Stanford. And we're speaking to AI transformation exclusively, not specific deployments of the type of AI. I'm more pointing to, and I think, Omar, actually what you're saying resonates with me, and I think we're actually saying the same thing. Sandy was referring to cross-functional, deployments and dependencies cross-functionally where you don't have access to the data, which is what I'm speaking to as well. If you can, in your case, point to a very specific thing you're asking it to do, much greater likelihood of reliability there. It's when you have these sort of cross-functional dependencies where data is siloed, or you can't give it the appropriate context or instruction, or integrate a human to do those things where it doesn't have that ability. That's where the failure that I'm speaking to.
Yeah, I think that the thing, we've been drawing a distinction between augmented intelligence versus artificial intelligence. And I think what Omar, you're interacting and you're building it versus having it go off on its own. I think that part of the challenge with adoption is people, even in that earlier stage of just using the LLMs, don't feel confident because of the hallucinations. And so releasing control to artificial intelligence because of the experience of current, gen search, uh, hallucinations makes us uncertain and it makes it less reliable. I do think, to your point, Omar, though, for where it's pretty repeatable workflow and you can control the action, so lead quals, right? Feels like an agent can do that and you're not going to suffer from hallucination. Whereas I'm building a strategy and I need to figure out my new financial forecasting and go out and, do a predictive model on that, and you have an agent that is acting as your outsourced FP&A that has to ingest data from your general ledger and all these other things. Like, maybe it's just that's not a repeatable workflow. That's applying a level of intelligence that I think perhaps a lot of people today still are kind of anxious about. I can't trust the black box yet. But for repeatable workflow, absolutely. I tee it up and it's kind of like I got a robot, right? I got a robot that's going to do the thing that I can put judgment and parameters around and metrics. And to your point, you can discount leads and you put a feedback loop back on it. So I think there may be a distinction on those two levels, augmented versus artificial, and level of sophistication of the task being asked.
I completely agree, and I love those categorization, but I challenge our audience to think about something, because eventually what all of us are talking about, there's still a trust issue. It's trust, right? Some people trust it more. We all remember those days where we didn't trust our data to be in the cloud, right? Are we going to put our financial data, our customer data? It is in the cloud. These trust issues are going to be solved. Now, we can argue whether they're going to be solved in 3 months or 2 years, and I have no idea. But all of us need to plan for a future, which I think would be sooner than later, that those things would be solved. So I wouldn't say I'm not doing anything. I would say exactly what you do. Categorize it into the right stages and the right, I would say, operations and projects, and start moving quickly. Don't wait until those trust issues are going to be solved, because then you're going to be late.
I'll jump in here. Yeah. Oh, I was gonna say.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, there's a really interesting use case here that we spun up internally at our company, which was basically customers around customer support. And so what we did was we spun up an MCP server that would look up into our logs whenever a customer had a question around these. And so kind of the mental framework that we had was, we cannot just, put this in the hands of customers immediately. So we made it an internal tool, and whenever a customer would ask a question around, their usage or something that is happening in a specific moment, someone in our team would ask that MCP bot the question, and they would get actually an answer. And so surprisingly, it was accurate 90% of the time, right? Very rarely did it hallucinate, despite whatever we were expecting. And I think with this speed of innovation, of not only the LMs, but also all the different protocols that are coming out, I do think that we're gonna get to a point where we can automate a lot faster than we think. And specifically with the MCP protocol, we can connect a lot of different tools and get access to data faster than ever. It still kind of breaks every now and then, but it is surprisingly good. And that kind of raises the question, what frameworks do you guys have in place today? Where to have humans, even where to have AI agents? How are you guys thinking about the human in the loop here?
Well, think about it, right? I mean, the largest model is, so we had Randy talk about, differentiating between autonomous versus semi-autonomous, or, more of a co-pilot type. We had Omar was pretty passionate about his use case with, with qualifying leads and getting leads in there, right? But at the end of the day, if you think about it, the largest models we have today are what, 20 to 30 million parameters. You're talking 3 bytes per, 3 bytes, right, per word. So, or tokens. So you're talking 10 to the power of 10 and then 14 zeros, right? Approximately. If you think about it, a 4-year-old child in the first 4 years of his life takes in about 2 megabytes per second through the optic nerves. And if you take 1600 hours, which is about 4 years, and you multiply it out, surprisingly, you get 10 to the power of 14 again. So in terms of AGI and the ability to go beyond what I term as a syllogism, which is essentially what most large language models are, completing sentences for other people. I think thinking of large language models by themselves, holistically solving problems or being used as the fulcrum for agents is you're just not going to solve the problem. So I think it's more a question of the ability to marry up Gen AI along with context, which context is always king in this case, and then bringing in large quantitative models from a stochastic and deterministic, and then deciding is it RPA, and are you going to give a fixed set of steps, or are you going to do multi-level orchestration? But the human in the loop is important because if you're not testing the outputs of your models and not honing them, you're destined to failure in the long term, right? I could run the same experiment a million times, and the millionth and one time, it's probably going to give me a different answer. And that's the beauty of what we do, but that's also the challenge we face, right? So from that perspective, I mean, I think it's important to clearly define what your output's going to be, what your metrics are, what you're hoping to really achieve, and but in terms of context, you got to have a flywheel where you both have domain expertise as well as you've got the tools you're going to interact with. But if you're going to use MCP, then what systems you're going to call, et cetera, right? So, but I think expecting Gen AI to suddenly be this white knight, I mean, it's not going to be that, right? So, I mean, it's a syllogism. So, right? So.
I want to give another point of view, and of course I agree to what Trevor said, but helps me and help the people I speak about decide when you feel comfortable to actually put AI in front, and where you have to have the human there. And the best example I'll give how many times you needed to buy a product and eventually you ended up speaking with an SDR. Now I love SDRs, but in reality, you probably know about their solution and your problem more than they do. You live that world, right? I sold to head of customer success previously into Tango, and initially they knew more than I did. So I feel more comfortable putting an AI that will replace that function. AI will do a better job than a junior salesperson that. Where I'm not going to put AI, for example, is representing me. I have AIs that are actually, flooding leads to me, people LinkedIn, things like that. I would never have the AI respond with my name because I have my reputation. I need to take a very careful look at that. And I think we're years away from that, by the way, Trevor, and exactly what you said about all those kinds of things. So for me, I'm always looking about, okay, what does it replace? If it replaces a function that is not very educated about what we do, yes, I feel very comfortable in that. If it's supposed to replace something very, very complicated, then no. Then AI could actually save me time, but not replace it. Usually that's the framework I'm looking at. And I think Sandy mentioned it, whether it's co-pilot or agent, that's exactly those kinds of things. I would do an agent all the way when it replaces, I would say, a low function, and a co-pilot when it replaces a very complex function.
Yeah. I mean, I think at the end of the day, if you just look at enterprise software, right, the one thing, and Randy's probably got a good experience with this, is, as well as Mike, say I had to add Mike, he was with me at NYC a couple of weeks back. But with enterprise software, you're limited to seats. But I think what most people miss is that with Gen AI and with agents, what you're really going after is those tasks that most companies probably wouldn't want to hire a human being for, right? Like looking at a bunch of contracts or writing a couple of lines of code, or basically, the road task like qualifying leads, as you alluded, Omar, right? And if you look at just the US, we're talking about anywhere, depending on what data source you look at, you're looking about $5 trillion in FTE spend, right? Or salaries, what do you want to call it? If people believe, if organizations believe that you can give them just 5%, that Gen AI is worth 5% in terms of what they're willing to pay, you're looking at anywhere from 200 million to about 400 billion. So 200 billion to 400 billion dollars in TAM or market cap. And that's what's there. So, you ignore AI and the ability to use AI, at least in enterprise software, at your own peril is where I'm going. Because at 400 billion, I mean, you're like 4 times the existing market cap, the existing TAM that most enterprise software companies are, right? Because you're not limited anymore by people and by headcount. It's more about, atomic units that you're buying. And if demand is elastic, then supply is elastic, right? So not to get too esoteric over there.
Yeah, so Trevor, I think you got the best stats, man. I gotta track you down and follow. You got these great points. So I've been in horizontal workflow automation for 20 something years, right? And one of the things about designing software in that construct is I think about you try to operate, define a process, you try to automate it, and then ultimately you try to eliminate it. And what I've been thinking about with agentic AI is there's this other category beyond that, and I'm calling it elevate. Like there's this whole new world in terms of how to think about a specific process. So I think your point, Trevor, and yours, Omar, is if you're just at the level of trying to automate task workflows and the human is in the loop, like you're behind the curve. You can already have agents do that for you. I think the move is it's up the level of abstraction, Omar, that you're pointing to. It's like when you need human judgment. So the reason you don't want someone to replace you, Omar, is because you've had all of this experience that informs your judgment and how do you reply, and it's hard to train the 4-year-old using your data, Trevor, right? Like when they get more sophisticated and they're 18, now maybe you do trust them because they have judgment in a way that's different. So I think of the human in this condition. And what I'm so interested and excited about is I think workflow automation tools are absolutely obsolete, and the humans now become orchestrators. They become orchestrators like on top of the loop. They're not in the loop. They're over the loop, and they're thinking about things. They're watching. They're tuning. They're escalating. So for you get that 1 out of 1,000 models that comes out wrong, you've got some sort of dashboard, but someone with judgment who's able to assess the output and understand if it's an aberration or is it an improvement based on what happened. My big fear is, Omar, you and I look like we're kind of on the other side in terms of we've been around for a while, is how do you take someone out of college and teach them judgment to be an orchestrator of agents? Like what we've used workflow automation for in the past is a breeding ground. You take that support agent, you have them do a couple of calls, you give them training, and then over 10 or 15 years, they become a sophisticated customer support director. Now you're going to miss this whole middle like mentorship of where people are developing judgment in whatever activity or function they're executing. Sales leader, success leader, marketing leader. If we're reliant on a generation of agents that are doing that for us. So the thing I'm sort of struggling with more broadly, and I'm glad I'm at the end of my career, is kind of like, what's my son going to do coming out of college in a world where you don't have the opportunity to be mentored and learn?
Your son's going to join Honeywell, or your son's going to join Lenovo, or your son's going to join Cisco, or your son's going to go to HP, or your son's going to go to Intel. And what he's going to end up doing is getting a digital twin. And that digital twin is going to be someone who represents the best of the IP that they have. Remember what I said, context is king, right? But domain expertise is king, right? And you alluded to it earlier, about vertical knowledge, right? But the problem, if you talk to Vimal Kapoor at Honeywell, or you talk to even Jensen Huang at NVIDIA, or you talk to Intel or any of the guys, right? But the problem is they don't have that IP readily available in terms of skill set. So what they really want is to capture all that IP that they've had for the last 15, 20, 30 years, and then share that information in the form of digital twins. So when your son joins them, he gets the expertise and the ability to ask questions out of the gate on what would Randy do in this scenario, what would Omar do in this scenario, or what would Julia do in this scenario, and he gets the benefit of all the years of experience. The thing is, as long as you're focusing on text, you're fine. When you bring in video and you start talking about predicting where the pixels are going to land, like I have a pencil and I say, is it going to drop here or here? That's where we're nowhere over there. But replicating people using, going and looking at all their videos, their text, and getting opinions. I mean, for example, a year ago, I always tell people I'm jealous of Alexander the Great because he had Aristotle teaching him for 14 years. And unfortunately, I'm a tad young, right? But I'm a huge fan of Aristotle and I've read it in Greek, right? But what we did, the first thing we did was, and partly because of me, was we created a digital twin of Aristotle on rhetoric, because I think rhetoric's been lost, right, in our education, right? So it's not that difficult as long as it's around text and finding the next best sentence, because language is pretty predictable: noun, noun, verb, noun, noun, adverb, right? The problem comes in when you look at large quantitative models. You're talking about stochastic versus deterministic, and you're trying to predict what the probability is of a certain event happening, which you were alluding to earlier, Randy. That's where Gen AI is a nice way to synthesize data and talk to your data, but it's not going to do that for you, right? At least I haven't figured it out yet. So maybe you guys have.
Yeah, Randy, I also wanted to double down on your point there. I really liked your heuristic of, whether or not we're applying human judgment to, kind of going back to the question here, where do we determine how to use humans versus agents? I also wanted to share a framework that I personally use when I'm working with B2B companies to determine this question, both for my own work as well as the work that I'm advising the teams on. And it's kind of at a high level, simply speaking, we use agents. I use agents for work that requires low creative complexity, and we generally lean on humans for work that requires high creative complexity. Just to kind of give an example here, if a task is repetitive, as Omar and Randy and many of you have pointed to, and it follows a clear pattern, and it doesn't necessarily require novel thinking, generally speaking, it's kind of a good candidate for us to consider whether or not it's a good fit for agents to run it. And here are some of those use cases or tasks include things like pulling reports, summarizing support tickets, enriching leads, so on and so forth. But if the task does have high creative complexity, or it requires some level of emotional intelligence or original creativity, a lot of the work that I do, for example, includes things like crafting a go-to-market narrative, or spinning up a new set of creatives that reflects new brand positioning, or handling perhaps a tricky client escalation, or even setting strategy for the next half of the year. That's where I really find that human plus augmented by AI is going to be a lot more powerful. So in that situation, myself or the team would end up using an AI tool or a copilot that's primarily orchestrated and or operated by the human, that just gives us more control on that creative output, because we know that the outcome or the quality has so much more variance between what is good and what is bad. And, I do think one of the ways to overcome this overall agent adoption barrier that we've been talking about here is to really try to figure out how we can apply this framework and figure out which parts of the tasks that we need to complete have that low versus high creative complexity. I'll give one use case that I recently, utilized AI agents for, actually hiring, right? Like hiring actually overall seems like something with really high creative complexity. However, when you actually break down the different components of it, there are parts of that workflow that can actually be very useful to apply AI agents to. For example, screening resumes, right? Use a combination of AI prompts as well as tools to help identify and pinpoint who we should be moving forward in the screening process. And then in that process, recently when I made a hire, I also used an AI voice interview agent called Mirrorwork to auto-complete the screenings and summarize the results for me, so that basically in my inbox, I see exactly who I should have a human connection with and complete final round interviews for. Because during that process, as Omar was pointing out too, it's kind of representing me, it's representing, my brand, it's representing kind of that sales conversation too, of like, you want to work with me, not just, the AI screener here. So, completed the final round interviews, hired someone within less than a week. And like, that's something that I never imagined would have been able to happen without those agentic powers. So, one of the frameworks that I use, very simply, perhaps oversimplified, but really thinking about, what is the level of creative complexity involved in the type of work, and how can agents and or a combination of human plus, co-pilots and or AI augmented tools help me complete this task.
Sandy, let me push the envelope a bit on this specific use case, because I love it. And that's example of a business processes that AI can enhance and augment and help. And you spoke about one part, but I'm going to ask you two questions. I don't know what the answer is, but one, do you think that the way you're actually interviewing people, is it good enough? And two, are your decisions of hiring the right people, are they good enough? And what I'm saying is, if we apply AI to this, AI could actually find patterns. It could tell you, you know what, your interview was amazing, but you probably should have asked those kinds of questions. Now, is that going to be right or wrong? I don't know, but that's a good brainstorming, I would say, colleague to actually see if you can improve the way you interview. The same way, you could tell AI, I've interviewed those 5 people. These are our interviews, and I've decided to pick this one. And these are the reasons. AI could actually reflect and say, you know what? This is what I think about it. Again, it could be completely wrong, but in my experience, it will help you gain more insights, and thus improve the process as well. So it's not just automating, it's also about really, I would say, a brainstorming pal for me. And I'm trying to combine it in as many aspects as we can. Sometimes the results are ridiculous, but we're experienced enough to say that's fine, that's not relevant. But sometimes, oh, I didn't think about those things. And that's what really amazes me. And I think it will improve and improve.
I love it. In fact, I think you're spot on. In fact, I haven't applied the AI to my portion of the interview, right? And so I think one of the things that's missing there is I actually firmly believe that the screener, the AI, interview agent, does a better job than me in identifying the signals that a candidate is going to need to qualify for the round. For example, I put in about 8 criteria, different skills like communication, collaboration, et cetera, et cetera. And I believe that in my conversations, I'm actively looking for all 8 of those signals, but I think the reality is that my mind share, what I'm actually processing, is probably a maximum of 1 at a time. And realistically, in a 45-minute, even 1-hour interview conversation, I'm probably not getting as much clarity on the signals as possible. So I think that, and then also making sure that the way that I run those interviews, I'm actually looking for the exact same signals I think that I was originally screening for. I don't have a feedback loop there. And that's a great example of how, I can further use, agentic powers to, provide feedback to the interviewer as well, to say, did the interviewer actually hold up their part in completing this process? So I love that push.
Yeah, one of the companies that we are working with that they actually started to use their agents to do the interview, to at least do the first round of interviews. But one of the things that because we also review all the recordings and the different to review all the transcript as well. And the one scenario we actually observed that one of the candidates is also using AI agent. So we are in the situation that we have an AI agent candidates that's actually talking to an AI interviewer candidate, which is a very interesting scenario. So I'm really curious to see how this goes.
Yeah, I'm surprised they didn't go into their own language if one AI agent was talking to the other, but we've seen that happen. So
Yeah, are you talking in 0 and 1s?
yeah,
Yeah.
But we're all talking about agents and Gen AI and AI like it's it's new, and I mean machine learning, deep learning, NLP has been around for 9-10 years. Maybe it was a black box. Deep learning, you couldn't really figure out what the answer was, but the answer looked great. But tell me, any one of you, right? I mean, would you trust if you were running a sales cycle and you had to bet your life on a number? Would you trust what your rep or RVP told you, or would you trust what a machine learning or deep learning model would tell you, or using NLP, subtext of conversation, stuff like that? Would you trust the sales rep and the RVP, or would you trust AI?
I'll jump in here. Yeah, I think we're getting more and more in a world where people will actually trust the AI, right? Because it captures all the data points and it will be a lot more objective, especially if you set out the right guardrails around your own framework or process, right? One of the things that I was going to add is, and a really good way to think about it, I think, is what is the cost of failure, right? If the cost of failure is minimal, then you can go ahead and put in an AI agent. And so even to do forecasting, for instance, I think, hey, if every single model is probably going to be off by a few percentage points. So I think there you can be very secure about having an AI forecast. But if you're actually having a self-driving car, the cost of failure is gigantic, right? So that's a complete different way to approach things. So it's definitely kind of like one of the things, yeah.
But I think
We actually
the point you're making, which is interesting, because we were using at Max here, where I was last, we were one of the first companies to use Gong forecasting, but this falls under that augmented intelligence paradigm, and it was awesome. It was awesome. It ingested all this data historically. It measured all the interactions you're having. It had all this predictability. It helped you understand where we had our sales methodology in it, but it still required the sales manager and the sales leader to check it. And so to your point, Anis, like, would I trust running my business on a selling agent that was going to go out and sell and have its embedded forecast and tell me what it was going to hit? I mean, the cost of failure is really high in that context. I'd be anxious. But the power of the forecasting versus what we used to, I mean, I've been in sales forever. I mean, looks like Trevor, you were at Salesforce when I was there. It just, this monster process of going through like augmented intelligence with AI is going to make us all better. But I don't know on agentic, like when do you turn it over to have a agent leader, sales leader that's going to run
Well,
your go to market?
I think we actually built this very example. So, I stepped into this new role. I had, Ed, Trevor, he gave me 7 days to get not just a waterfall, but a bottoms up forecast,
Yeah.
with too many deals to be able to count and get insight on. So we used the product, for the go to market of which I lead to establish a workflow, scrawling data. And I think it probably produced some stuff similar to what you came to experience, Randy, from Gong, but it was essentially taking call transcripts and email back and forths and notes and account plans from within Asana. And I gave it a prompt that was my indication of what we use today to call a deal in or out. And then I would cross-reference that against my own interpretation of this just to determine, what was the quality of what was being called there. Fast forward to the end of the quarter, I think, what I was getting was really valuable insights in this extremely short amount of time as to where these deals stood without having to bother the salespeople for it. But it turned out I had a relatively cynical take, up front as to the likelihood that or the prompt that I was using, as to the likelihood these deals were going to come in, and we achieved better results than were immediately forecasted. Obviously, that's a great general outcome, but I think still today, as far as we can see, we require both. And I think this is why, you mentioned with the elimination of workflows too. I think it's more just the elevation of how those workflows, what they enable us to execute. Your son or the next generation, I think, has an opportunity, and I think this is what Sandy was hitting on too, is to step in and determine where is it that AI can still be really powerful. The agents can be deployed to perform these tasks. How is that continuing to evolve over time, and where do humans still need to step in and execute certain functions that are higher reasoning? And collaboration has been a mess for a long time. As we get more and more into this world and we are automating a lot of the tasks, I think we'll start to face new problems about those things that have made it most difficult for us to transform, for us to adopt these new ways of thinking and to collaborate and to have data. You mentioned the MCP servers earlier. I agree. There's we should be spinning these up. Every tech company should be spinning these up, and will improve a lot of our ability to get access to the data that we need in order to perform the actions that we're asking for these to take already today. But I think workflows, and this is sort of like what Reid Hoffman's book about the new AI world starts to get at, is that we have these headlines, and we've seen it with the Industrial Revolution all the way through to today, that robots are going to take over, they're going to eliminate everything. I really see it still as an elevation that humans will need to evolve. Those that take initiative and start to learn, the things that will be required of them as our work gets elevated will, benefit. Those that don't, I think, may ultimately fear that their jobs will, become redundant.
Yeah, we also started to observe that the agent not only to help us to take on some of the repetitive tasks, it also helps some of our entry-level employees, some of the younger generation to accelerate their learning. Like
Exactly.
so now that we actually have fewer teammates, but that there are more moderators of the agents, but also we use agent to help us to read faster and then to learn more knowledge, to summarize all the experience that are gained. So we do observe that many of our younger generations that in our team that they have gained more than 10x or more experience in the last whole year just by moderating and observing that the multiple agents that kind of reporting to them. So I don't think agents are going to replace us, but it will definitely help us to all evolve. That help us to accelerating and help us to become a better ourselves.
Jumping in here, since we talked about sales specifically, right? How are you guys thinking or envisioning a world with sales teams with fewer AEs and SDRs hitting higher revenue targets, right? There's a ton to be done here. How are you guys thinking about it? How are you thinking about transitioning to this world?
I think it's more about, and again, I think it's more about being AI aware. It's not so much about replacing human beings as much as being able to leverage AI to do your job better. So I think, with the information and with the tool sets, and you were talking, Mike and Randy, you were talking about Gong, and then you talked about, but even over there, right? If you're looking purely at, calls, emails, et cetera, you're still going to incur, the issues we have in terms of hallucinations or bias, what we call bias, which is a big deal in models, because you're looking at text. But if you bring in large quantitative models and you bring in what we call LQMs, and you start doing regression analysis or you start doing Markov, then all of a sudden you tend to account for that bias, and you can get 98% results, et cetera, et cetera. But I think, at the end of the day, I mean, I ran a $1 billion business at Salesforce, and it was brute force. I made everyone do QBRs every week. They probably hated my guts. I told everyone it was 3x their quota was the standard. It wasn't 1x. Ed remembers that fondly. So that's how you perform, right? But today, when we work with, with Lenovo, we work with Cisco, some of the large companies in the world, and we regularly give them 98% top down and about 92% bottoms up, calling the forecast without bias, and at billions of dollars. And the beauty there is, it's more about making everyone, get out their inner superpowers, right? Your inner Steve Jobs or your inner, what was your hero, right? Whether it's Elon Musk or whoever your hero is, but essentially giving them superpowers, because you're giving them information they never had before at their fingertips, and it's humanly not possible. Our corpus is not large enough for us to be able to get the types of AI insights you can get from data today, talk to it on the fly, and get responses in real time that help you put more money in your pocket, versus you focusing on doing all that research, account research and calls, et cetera, right? So I think where that's concerned, you're going to see greater productivity, and it's not so much replacing people. I just think the per capita, the GDP is going to keep going up, and we're going to see better knowledge workers. And instead of spending time on rote tasks, like I don't want to bring iPhones back to the US and build them, right? I still want to be able to do the stuff that's cool, like building AI models and doing knowledge work, right? And that's what's going to happen to salespeople, right? Instead of rote tasks, you're going to see them more productive. That's what I look at.
Totally agree. I think that's a really salient point. Like we're talking about a world where, not we, the panel, I think generally agrees this isn't about replacement, but about augmentation of knowledge workers. I think you hear a lot of the talk elsewhere that it's about, the potential for replacement. And, the reality is 60 to 70% of the work they're still doing today is extremely administrative. Knowledge workers generally, and salespeople specifically. In the example that I gave, now I can empower a salesperson rather than having to take and input all these notes, to maybe spend more time looking at that 13-minute snippet of how the customer engaged with us, on that particular topic. What was their, language, their mannerisms? What did they say or not say? Who did speak up and didn't? How can you engage them in a way that could help reframe, their thinking? We're not putting nearly enough attention towards these things now. And that's, the forecast. Yes, ultimately, is it a question of who's going to be better forecaster? I do think it's a collaborative effort, because now I can deploy the salesperson to go out and better engage those people on a personal level, rather than spending their time, behind their laptop, inputting all these notes that take so much of that their time today.
Yeah, I think a couple of things are true. In the sales teams I've worked with, is they got to make money. So the quota gets set so that a certain percentage of the sellers make money. And my rule of thumb is 80% of your sellers need to be making 80% of the quota. If they're doing that, then you can start to lever up. Like another truth in sales, this quota always goes up. One of the metrics we've used in the past is like it's a 4x multiple. You pay someone $200,000, you put a quota at $800,000. I think with augmentation, you could increase that, and maybe it's a 6x multiple on top of what they're making, because you're augmenting them and they're able to do more. But at the end of the day, they're still able to hit their number. Third truth of sales is you're going to have people who take advantage of this stuff, and they're going to make a crap load of money. And then you're going to have the people on the tail end that want to do it the way they did it, and they're going to get fired. And in sales in particular, I think you have a higher attrition rate than broadly across the organization. Let's say your sweet spot for attrition, if you're running a company, is under 15%, 10 to 15%, right? At turnover every year. Your sales team is maybe north of that, 15 to 20%. And I think what you'll find is the people that are out in front, that are making the most money, that are taking the bigger quota, hitting President's Club are going to be the ones adopting these tools and augmentation. They're going to figure it out, right? They're the CEO of their own territories. And then the rest of the people are going to say, I want to do what they're doing. I want to make money and I want to be effective and efficient. And I'm okay with taking more quota because I know I can deliver, and they get the better accounts. It's like the classic sales growth strategy. You start off in early stage, hard transactional sales, and you move up to enterprise and you do relationship management. But you got bigger quotas as you go up. So I do think sales is such a great function because you can look at it and you can measure success, you can measure leverage, and they're always the best sellers, the most creative. You got ADD, they're trying everything. My top seller last year at Maxio made 2x more than everyone else. That guy was in the office every single day. He was doing LinkedIn posts. He was using AI to augment everything he was doing. And the other guys that weren't hitting quota, I was like, why aren't you doing what they're doing? Well, I want to play golf, or I want to kick off on Friday at 4 and drink a beer. So I think there is an absolute difference in orientation, and there's a system that will allow it to expand to drive more efficiency by giving more quota, but the AEs are still going to make their money.
I want to be a bit provocative and suggest that we might be looking at the problem differently, or should look at differently, because up till now the conversation was inward. How will the sales team going to look like, and what is going to be? And I actually think that the entire sales team or entire sales motion might change because we need to look at the buying experience. And think of yourself the first time, I think I've mentioned that last time I've met you, Randy. Think of the first time you've encountered or you chatted with ChatGPT. I was amazed, like, oh, that is amazing. And we heard some use cases today that all of us are amazed from what AI can actually do. You actually think that your customers are going to continue to agree to buy in the same way that you're selling today? That they're going to start with forms on the website and then SDRs and then a salesperson doesn't know, and then everything has to change. I don't know what's going to change, but everything has to change. So for me, the focus is really first trying to vision what's going to be in the future, how a buyer is going to buy, and then actually decide how is my sales team going to look like. I think sales is an amazing and crucial function. We have to have sales. We have to have people there. Nobody's going to buy $1 million solution without a person. But what is the soul of this person? How will we motivate it? How will we measure that? I don't know. But it's going to start with how the buyer wants to buy. And I am 100% sure that this is going to be different than how buyers are buying today because of that experience, because everybody is exposed to those things.
I think that's right. And you mentioned earlier, how silly would it be not to just adopt this because you're going to miss out. And I think the opportunity here is actually maybe put slightly differently, but I think is striking the same chord is as a vendor, what are the ways that I can attach myself to enabling their AI transformation? And if their association then with my brand becomes that I enabled their ability to go through this transformation much more efficiently, rapidly, with ease than they otherwise would have, there is the opportunity. And so I think that's sort of what you're saying is I understand how buyers are going to buy, map to that likelihood. And I think for us, at least, that's acknowledging that, most of these are failing today. It's a big learning curve, and people don't want to change. And so how can we lean into that reality and the reality of what is available, via AI today, and start to carve out that path, make it feel more approachable, more accessible to solve the problem that they need to, and give them sort of a journey map for how to do that. And then the association with, our brand, or that the relevant brand becomes, wow, look what they've enabled us to do, my department to do, my company at large to achieve as a result.
Yeah, there's also a discussion on so whenever we are thinking about to buy a solution, that we will also face the question like, should we buy or should we just build internally? But now with all the AI developing tool, that building internally is actually getting a lot cheaper. So we are also talking to several enterprise buyers that they are proactively thinking about that their buying decision and how they actually allocate their budget in terms of buy versus actually build internally. So that whole buying experience and whether or not they're actually going to buy a solution, I think that that's also something that I'm very curiously to observe the trends.
Yeah. I wanted to add a bit more to what Omar and Mike were saying around the changes in how people or businesses are buying and how people are changing how they buy more broadly. One of the things I observe in working with B2B companies that more and more B2B companies are excited about building what we call product-led growth, right? And it's kind of this behavior in which we're a lot more excited, or we expect to be able to try before we buy. And that kind of changes how traditional sales-led or enterprise-led models are thinking about offering their products and services to their customers. And in particular, one of the areas in which I'm really excited and bullish on how agentic AI can transform product-led growth models is specifically with onboarding. I do think that onboarding is actually one of the most important and biggest surfaces that companies and products will use to qualify and build intent for users. And if you look at most B2B products out there, a lot of them that are product led, they're stuck in these product led flows, right? They have these sort of like click through guides, like next step, here are the first 3 things to do. They have these tool tips, they have these onboarding questionnaires, and then you have an entire product or marketing team figuring out what are the 5 questions we ask, and then figure out what are the 6 multiple choice, categories that we can offer to people. Whereas nowadays, this is something I think, a lot of B2B companies can learn from consumer apps, actually. A lot of apps like companion apps or habit trackers or even language learning apps, that onboarding is very much driven by voice agents or these chat-like experiences where you open the app, somebody guides you through this very branded experience. You get all the information that you ever wanted for onboarding, and even more than that, and you get far more context around what the user's goals are. And I think that more B2B companies can actually benefit from using these transcripts, these conversations to extract even more intent. And I think that creates this pipeline for product-led growth in a way that was not necessarily possible before, right? Because when people start talking, people aren't very concise. I'm not concise, and we just start to give away more information about our needs and what we want than we expect to. So I think as a result of that, these experiences that B2B products can provide are going to be far more personalized. Those sales calls can be more personalized, whether the sales call is conducted by an AI agent and or a human being. And there's so many tools out there like VoiceFlow, for example, that let you build these off-the-shelf chat voice AI agents for experiences like this. So, really from a growth perspective, I'm really excited and bullish about agents radically improving the quality of personalization, which, in turn improves user activation, expansion potential, customer lifetime value, etc.
Yeah, I just offer one other acronym: agent-led growth,
ALG.
right? And I think to Omar's point, and you're spot on, Omar, you're taking us from an augmented experience to an artificial experience based on the revolution in the buyer's journey. Buyers using agents, companies are going to have to figure out how to respond to that with agents. So agent-agent interaction. And then Sandy, to your point, the way that you get up and running, the way we think of that paradigm is going to radically shift as well. And so I think it's beyond product led. I think there's a whole new wave that we're going to be anticipating along marketing, sales, and service across the whole go-to-market. It's not just revolutionizing sales; it's the whole go-to-market.
I'll jump in here. Yeah, that is very spot on, right? We've literally been rethinking about how to redo our entire onboarding, and it's not just through a voice-led motion. There's even more than that, right? As a product, you can already read, let's say, through MCP again, bringing it up, but you can definitely read through different products that you integrate with. How, let's say, your CRM, right? How is your data structure in the CRM? What are you typically filling? And then automatically infer from that how you can customize the onboarding of your own product based on these integrations, right? And so instead of having a user even go in and manually customize their own settings, you can actually infer a lot of these settings leveraging AI. And so a very, very exciting application of AI agents is through onboarding. I think Juliet, tell me if I'm wrong, but I think we're getting up on time, right?
Yep. We have a minute,
Well,
and thank you so much, Anise and everyone. How about we make it a little bit more, I don't know, commercial, and just do a quick round of shameless, selfless, is it agentic promotion? Anise, let's start with you. What's up with attention?
Thank you. Yeah, attention.com, we're your system of AI agents for sales. We automate a lot of work out of your customer conversations and interactions, going from sales reps all the way up to leadership.
Trevor.
So Aviso, we automate your entire soup to nuts process, right from lead to renewals, leveraging agents and agentic AI, of course, but we strongly believe you need the platform and you need to own the data in order to prevent the kind of hallucinations that you guys are referencing, et cetera. So that's what we do, and we strongly believe that over the next couple of years, enterprise software and especially CRM as we know it today is undergoing to go a massive transformation and disruption. And hopefully, we'll be leading the way over there. So,
Cheng.
I lead the I lead a hockey stick growth agency, and we help companies to turn the axial growth, and we specialize in AI powered growth for AI companies.
I'm not sure about this one, Randy. Startup guy. That's what I've been told.
Right. So I've been just left my last company, Maxio. I've started an advisory service, CEOX.io. And I'm really focused on operationalizing agentic and what that means. So this whole conversation, I've been advising a couple of early stage companies, one of which I might run with, the other ones I'm just playing around. So always interested in talking to people about the impact of agentic.
Sandy.
Hey everyone, I'm Sandy. I'm pulling some data around retention for AI products. If you're a company or a founder that has an AI product and you're struggling with retention problems, in exchange for learning more about your business, I'd love to share with you some of my learnings and perhaps some tips and strategies on how you can improve retention for yours.
Michael.
Thanks so much for having me. Really enjoyed the discussion. I lead our go-to-market for our recently launched product AI Studio, which is a no-code workflow builder to empower teams to work cross-functionally, establish really clean and easy workflows, leveraging AI to solve a lot of the cross-functional problems that we described exist today. And that's, of course, on top of our collaborative work management platform that allows you to connect individual tasks all the way up through to your mission critical goals as an organization and everything in between. You can access it for free online at asana.com.
So, and last but not least, Omar.
Thank you. It was great speaking with you guys. SalesPeak AI is actually redefining the B2B buying experience, and our first product deals with inbound. So imagine everybody that gets to your website, big, small, qualified, unqualified, gets to have a conversation with an AI as smart as the founders, can answer any question that they have, but also is a sales expert. So calculates their intent, runs a discovery process, runs a qualification process, guides them to a goal, and then provide you insights back about what they're asking and what they're not. So all of a sudden, you know what's going on in your website. It's like the founder is at the gate of the website. That's the experience we're trying to create.
Thank you so much for participating again, everyone.